closure. And tonight is not a funeral, it's not a eulogy. We're not going to go back and read where they went to high school and what all they, did growing up. This is about talking about what they meant to the history of Grapevine and to the Grapevine Historical Society. And I think that we have so many folks on this list that really made a contribution. And so it's really special to remember them in that way. And we have some loved ones and family members in plural that brought an extra we didn't even know about tonight to talk about them. And so I think you're going to enjoy it. There may be a few tears, but I hope a lot of smiles, because these are great people that did a lot of really positive things for our community. So Mark, I'm going to let you take over.
We're starting off with Sue, Grapevine's own Elizabeth Taylor. She's going to get up and talk about Gary Blagg. And I will mention, just because I know Gary was one of the people that passed during that strict part of the pandemic where they said you can have no more than 10 people at a funeral. And I will tell you that to our family, that was a complete, we felt like we were shirking our duty as funeral directors. We even met and thought about telling them to stuff it, that we were just going to let whoever come in, but we didn't feel like we could. And so, Wanda, there we were, right? Just 10 people. But it was the first time we ever streamed something like that. So we did try. But I'll leave it at this and leave it with Sue. I'll always regret that we didn't have some people peeling rubber out there in the parking lot at the funeral home when they came out. So I'll leave it with that. Sue?
Okay. Wanda, this is, of course, his bride. Wanda, stand up. How many years were y'all married?
57.
57. You were 17, right? You were 17. And she
left in school.
Okay. Well, she took over where I left off. Gary Blagg was born in April 1940, and I was born 6 months before that. And I don't know, most of you know my brother, Bill Powers. Did y'all know he had an identical twin, Bob Powers?
Yes.
Well, some of you do. But anyway, Gary's grandmother and my mother were sisters, so she was the youngest of 11. So Gary and I were just kind of raised as brother and sister. We lived on Worth Street, and they lived around the corner of Franklin and Smith. Gary lost his father at a very early age. Terrible ordeal, and then he lost his beloved voodoo. And then their house burned on Easter Day. And the city of Grapevine, rebuilt the house. But anyway, we were a very close family. And Gary was known in the later years as the oldest teenager in Grapevine. And that was his trucks and his, I don't know, whatever. He had all the latest gimmicks. And he and Wanda tamed him. Or made him a better person. Or got him on the right track. I don't know. It was a tough. And they won all kinds of awards. Assistant of the Year, Ted Wilhoit, she was chairman of the chamber. They were really mover and doers in Grapevine, and they were so active in the chamber. So they've been leaders. They owned the Goodyear store, and they were just so much a part and added so much. Gary would have been a poster child for ADA Day. He wasn't dumb, but he just could not stay out of trouble. He could not stay, it was just one thing after another. I tried to get him to do his homework. This was our cultural event of Monday nights. We didn't have a television, but he lived with his grandparents, his mother and he did. They had a hay cart. If you're that old, that was fancy. So we'd all take our baths and get ready for Monday night and go down and watch Monday Night Wrestling. That's our cultural event, I'm telling you, that church. So Gary and I say, Gary, what do you have this week? Let's just, I made him flashcards. I don't think he ever did multiplication tables. Anyway, we were just that close. All through school, we started the first grade together and graduated from high school. He was a charming charming, big child. How many of you knew Gary? Okay, enough said. I think Duff has one little, you want to tell it now, Duff? Come on.
My favorite Gary story.
Yeah.
Probably maybe 15 years ago, a good long while ago, after I'd left Delta and come back and kind of got regrouped in Grapevine again. And we were having the chamber banquet out at the Grapevine Concourse in that room they have out there. And of course, I was running late as always. And so I'm driving down there and going through the parking lot faster than I should, trying to find a spot. And I just get past the spot and I see it empty. And I said, oh, good. So I was going to back up. Well, there was a car just right behind me on my bumper. And so I said, well, you blank. And so, of course, they couldn't hear me, but that's what I said in the car. And so we got parked after we find a place. We got inside. A little while later, I had not met Gary. And he came up to me and he said, so, you think I'm a blank? And I said, excuse me? And he said, I read lips. He said, I can't hear, but I read lips. I said, oh, mortified. And on a day, whenever I saw him, he'd give me a big hug and he'd say, it's your favorite?
He couldn't hear thunder, but he did. Anyway, he was a charming man, and he left us too soon, way too soon. As I say, we were raised like brother and sister. Bill Powers, my brother, taught us both to drive, and he swears he didn't teach Gary, but he did. So I want to tell one story, and how many here went to Grapevine High School? Okay, you know, you're told to some of us that it was a small school, and we had so many great times. We had great teachers, and it was just a wonderful place to grow up. So we were in high school, and Gary was kind of slow, or he didn't date much. He was so lucky to find Wanda, but anyway, two of his best friends were Rachel Ward, who's left us, and William Schaefer. So Gary told me he had a date, and I said, well, good, super. So, and then he said, but I'm talking to William and Rachel. And I thought, oh gosh, oh no. So the next day at school, I see Gary, and he had these big black glasses around, and they were taped together. They were every part of it. I said, what the heck happened? He said, well, I don't think William and Rachel told me right. I said, oh God, what did they tell you? Now I heard that some people at Grapevine High School parked at the lake. We just heard. It's just a He said, we went to the lake, and William and Rachel told me, no matter what she says, she doesn't mean it. I said, oh my God. He said, they told me no matter what she says, that I just, keep trying to whatever. He said, she beat the crap out of me. And I said, you deserve it. We miss Gary and Wanda, and they're just such an important part of Grapevine. So thank you.
He's part of the Grapevine Police Department training. They make sure all the new officers know who he was, because he got stopped by everybody at least once, and sometimes more than that. And they wanted to make sure that the younger officers didn't give him any grief.
Yes, he had tickets on deferred adjudication in several counties. And I am proud to say that Wanda and I do share a birthday. So it's my turn next. I'm up for 2 tonight, and then others will do others. So I'm going to talk about a very special individual, Dr. John Boyd, who left us too soon, as we all know. He was born December the 13th, 1956. He was an interesting character, as many of us are. However, in regards to this history society and affection for all things Grapevine and its history, John really hardly has an equal. And I know I think Tommy will agree. I'm going to put John up there with Dorothy Best and Mary Virginia and Maybelle Woods for his love of Grapevine. Now, two of those, Dorothy Best and Mary Virginia, were born here. Maybelle, you thought would have been, but she didn't. She moved in, and so did John. And he loved it. He was born in Germany, in Stuttgart, down in southern Germany, on a U.S. military base. He grew up with Dorothy in Kansas. Right over the head. Okay. A tough room, no humor tonight. Then he found a new home here in the great state of Texas. He graduated from SMU in '78. I won't hold that against him. He did have the wisdom to go to the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, though. He got out in '82. He did a residency at Parkland in '85, then went on to become an anesthesiologist, like a cousin of mine up in Oklahoma City. And after, that's a lot of study and a lot of work, right, to become a physician and to build a thriving business as well. He thrived in retirement, though, equally. This is what's really so unique about him in many ways to me. He went on to become a medical consultant, a writer, a public speaker, editor of the Grapevine Historical Society newsletter, travel and education director at the Grapevine Wine Pouring Society, and earned his executive certificate in business administration from the University of Notre Dame. He published 2 regional history books, Parkland Hospital, Images of America, and Grapevine, Texas, The Stories Behind Our City Streets, which there are, I think, 20 copies here tonight or thereabouts that can be purchased. If you don't have them, the money goes to the Historical Society. So you should keep that in mind. In addition, as if that's not enough, he was a master gardener and he grew prize-winning orchids. And in his later years, like George Harrison and Paul McCartney, he picked up the ukulele and played in a local band. So really a Renaissance man. And I didn't know until I went over to visit Becky that in addition to his degree in biochemistry, he also had a degree in art. And so the house is lovely. It's like you're in Grapevine, but you feel like you're in a mix of San Miguel de Allende and Santa Fe. Beautiful. So, and a sweet, mild-mannered man as well, had a gentility about him and a genuineness about him that I really appreciated. I felt a little inferior in his presence, which is a good thing. It doesn't take much for me to be inferior. But I'll move on, just some of the research Tommy and I were talking about it. There's people that have been here forever and don't know what he knew. But he threw himself, I always thought it was Gano. I didn't know it was Gano. Dr. Gano, who had been a brigadier general in the Confederacy and lived here, and how I knew about him was going to law school. When Howard Hughes died, they used the Gano line, the Supreme Court did, to find out who, because there was there's 1,000 wills. Everybody thinks, they're due part of Howard Hughes' money. But he was generated from right here. In fact, Tommy and I, we think that he may have been born in that cabin, that Bouchon cabin where John lived near, that evidently we think was stolen by the Dallasites. Is that right, Tommy?
Dallas moved it out of here in '76.
Yeah.
And they named the street over there Gano.
He researched that. Next, he was going to research Howard Hughes' birthplace, being there. And he organized cemetery tours. I know I went on that with a few of you, which is a really neat idea and we'd like to, we want to kind of pump that up and do it like they do out the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, which will be really a lot of fun if we can do that. And I'll be glad to help with that. But he researched, there were the remains of those bones that were here for the longest time. People thought they were Native American bones. And so some people thought it was Cochise, and I was like, hell, he was never captured in the Dragoons. It couldn't have been Cochise, or, you know, I don't think. They captured Geronimo in the Heart of Rocks, that's a whole other story. So that's how I kind of came in on this deal, and John and I kind of got off on the wrong foot, and it wasn't even his fault, it was Debbie Meeks, and Debbie's not here for me to throw her under the bus. So we'll talk about that later. But this all goes back to the old Lucas Faust view, we won't get into it. But long story short, he was able to solve a mystery and an injustice, really, of this African-American, unknown African-American bone sitting up there in the History Society, in the museum, telling everybody it was Native American. And so he took that on himself. And they're buried at the Grapevine Cemetery. And with the help of Vala, she and Lucas Funeral put the marker down for that. And that's a great act that he performed, really. Right along with all of the great, R.D. Eisenberg, who y'all don't know, left us too early. A great Jewish physician in Fort Worth that has identified the dead in Chile, in Florida, all over Asia, governments all over the world praise him. And I preached his funeral and he's left us too soon. So John Boyd, not trying to overplay, really is in that same pantheon. If you go to the links to identify and unknown and mark them, then you've done God's work, in my mind.
Mark, one other thing he did, he found in doing research for his book on the streets, and if you haven't read it, Olivia, you need to read that. It really tells you so many interesting facts about people and how the streets and who they were, why they were named after them. But he found 2 streets that got changed during the sesquicentennial to be more, I don't know how you can be more Texas than Grapevine, Texas, but they were sort of Texanized or something. But anyway, he didn't like that. And he wanted us to change it back or put a sign underneath that said formerly whatever the street was. And we fought that battle. We never won it. But he was really big on that. For somebody who wasn't born here, he loved Grapevine and cared more about Grapevine history than a lot of people. So he really worked on that.
Yeah, he did. We're brief. I know we've got to keep moving tonight, but I think I've said what I need to say. But on being from here or not from here, does it really matter? It's like immigration in any part. And y'all, I'll just use this example. When I moved out to Moab, Utah years ago and got there and I was sitting in a diner having a Quake shake, which is this espresso coffee milkshake thing. And they were like, well, you hadn't been here long enough, to be opinionizing. And I said, well, what does it take? And they said, 6 months. That's what they said out in Moab. Here you are, 6 months. And I thought, well, that's pretty generous. It's not that way where I'm from, but in a way it is. Maybelle moved in here, and although she was married to a family, that had roots here, she became one of the queens of Grapevine. And I think John deserves that. He loved this town, and y'all know Allan. Some of you know Allan Barraclaw. His wife's recently passed, and his daughter's wanting to move to North Carolina with grandkids, and people have asked him, and he said, hell, I'm not moving. I'm staying right here in Grapevine. This is where my friends are. This is the place I love. Next up, we're going to hear about a great Methodist Church lover and Boy Scout, Paul Ernst. And I do not know who is doing that.
I'm Carolyn.
Okay, well, I didn't get the word. Come on up.
Nobody doing better than she did.
That's right. And I think, are you also going to talk about Allan? Well, you can just, hold the motion.
So I'm going to talk about not only my husband, Paul, but also Allan Mossman. In 1978, the Boy Scouts announced to their employees that they were going to move their headquarters from New Jersey to Irving, Texas. Whoa. So Allan got here a month or so before we did in 1979. We came down in February during one of your ice storms to look at housing. And the real estate agents showed us North Dallas, Carrollton, and I went back to the hotel room and cried. I said, I can't do it, I can't move there. And so Allan said to Paul, you need to look at Grapevine. So we got the real estate agent who knew nothing about Grapevine to bring us here. And we said, oh, this is home, this is where we want to go. So Allan and Paul had been friends before they passed for over 60 years. It was a long time. The two of them had a lot in common. If you know the Scout law, they were certainly the epitome of those characteristics. Scout law says that a Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, oh yeah, brave, clean, and reverent. And both of these gentlemen were all of those things. Allan was very creative. He was a big picture guy. So if you were thinking about a corporation, maybe he was the guy who was in line to be the next CEO. He worked at the national headquarters with a small staff. He was an idea guy, and so he worked on a lot of special projects. Paul was more like the engineer who made the decisions on how to implement things, and he had a very large staff, but they did work on things together. The Boy Scouts were chartered by Congress, one of the few organizations that has that distinction. And so every year, they have to make a presentation to the nation, to Congress. It's called the Report to the Nation. Paul's department prepared most of the information that went into that report. Allan, with a group of scouting people, Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, explorers, went to Washington, D.C. and presented that report. So they worked very closely together many times. After their retirement, another thing Paul and Allan had in common was they couldn't sit still. I don't think they had ADHD, but maybe they could have been, if they were a little younger, said they were ADHD. They always had to be doing something. Allan was one of the people who was instrumental in getting an endowment fund for the United Methodist Church here in town. And he also maintained his BSA relationships in that he did a lot of things. He arranged reunions for retirees. He wrote and edited a newspaper that was that he also got published and distributed to all of the retirees from the Boy Scouts throughout the nation. He arranged quarterly meetings for the local Boy Scouts with a program each time. When they created a new camping site for jamborees in West Virginia, Allan was right there, make sure that all of the local retirees could go on a trip and visit it. He established and maintained communications between all of the local scouting people. And of course, Paul got him interested in the Historical Society. One of the lasting things that I will always think about, and every time I look look at our logo, the masthead of the newsletter. Allan created that. He donated a lot of things to the museum that were quite, they were very unique items. For instance, he gave them a pocket knife that is, if it were on the market today, it would draw a lot of money. One of those things that is irreplaceable in our museum, and we could never insure it for enough money. Allan was also a proponent of making sure that the Historical Society maintained good communications with the city officials of Grapevine. He was instrumental in that. Paul, on the other hand, being the engineer he was more interested in the hands-on stuff. So if you went to the church, you might find him pulling weeds or trimming bushes. You might find him in the kitchen after a church supper washing dishes. If he was with the garden club, he loved to be digging in the dirt. You would see him on West Texas Street helping with the housing there. He was a treasurer for many, many years at the garden club. He was a volunteer at Mass Performance Hall in Fort Worth. He volunteered in the city festivals for probably 20, 25 years. After he retired, he was busy inspecting Cub Scout day camps to make sure that they not only had everything that they said they had, but they were doing it properly and making sure that it was safe for all of the Cub Scouts that would be coming. He was also active in retiree activities, and for the Historical Society, there was no one who liked to volunteer as Joseph more than Paul did. Every time Helen Jean said, well, I've got an opening, we don't have someone to be a docent for such and such a day, Paul said, oh sure, I can do that. When he wasn't busy being a docent, you would find him polishing the glass cabinets, vacuuming the floor, dusting. He was good at that at home too. He also gave some things to the Historical Society Museum. Not the expensive things that Allan had, but one of the things that he gave that I always loved was a little car, a wind-up toy that he'd gotten as a child. This little car, if you put it on a flat surface like this, it would go until it came to the edge, and instead of going off the edge, it would turn and keep on that tabletop or wherever it was. I loved that little car. He was the volunteer of the year for the city of Grapevine in 1999. Both Paul and Allan were recognized by the BSA for their volunteer activities after they finished their professional careers. And they always make sure that they got to do their good term every day.
Thank you. Junior, come on up here, brother. Yeah, you can't talk about Gayle, come on. I don't need to say anything about Gayle Hall. You should know her reputation precedes, and so does this guy.
Doing all right. Okay, now Sue, I'm not gonna talk about how many times any of us have been married,
Thank you,
what we did in school,
thank you.
what we did at the lake.
Thank you, thank you.
Now, I will tell you something you don't know. all the boys met at Smith's Cafe after the trip to the lake to discuss everything. You probably didn't know that.
I did not know.
Okay. Now you're smart as I am. Anyway, thank y'all for having us up here tonight. Gayle was born October 31st, 1952. If you hadn't picked up on that right quick, that was Halloween. Some people said that was a sign. So, I don't know, there's a lot of things I had happened through life it could have been. But she passed away August 22nd last year, 2021, at home. Gayle did get to stay at home thanks to the help of several women that stayed with her night and day. She was laid to rest at Parker Cemetery along with her son Deke, that unfortunately passed away approximately 2 weeks before she did. And they're buried right there together in the same, right close to our dad, where our great-grandparents, our grandparents, and our great-great-grandparents are all buried. So there was never a dull moment, I don't think. I've talked about the babysitting days before. I had that job when I was about 11 years old with her and Charlie, and I don't think any of you want that. and I did ask for it. But Gayle left a lot of footprints. Some of you didn't like, but she left a lot of footprints all over town. When she was born, the first 6 years of her life were Dad and Minnie run grocery stores south of town, and we farmed. So she was broke in running around the business at an early age. That was the basis. That's where she got started. In 1958 is when we moved out to Midway Camp. Now, some of y'all may not know, but Midway Camp was there before the Catfish Hut was. And Dale and I started the Catfish Hut. We opened it in 1972. Well, Gayle worked for us, or we worked for her, or something like that. But anyway, she was out there cooking hamburgers. Well, in Midway Camp, it was putting gas in boats, selling bait, cooking hamburgers, not all at the same time, but anyway, and there was many times there that I saw my dad and Minnie leave and just let her run things while they was out running around. So she got broke in pretty early on all that kind of stuff. Back during that time was when she was voted Miss Lake Grapevine. I don't know what year. Sue, what year was that? Do you know? I'll put you on the spot. But anyway, she was a cook, a waitress at the Catfish Hut, helped us manage. We would leave it with her. Later on, Gayle got married, had 2 kids, Carolyn and Deke. Carolyn lives up in Paris, is doing pretty well right now. Gayle was involved in livestock shows for many, many years with the kids when they were in 4-H and FFA and all this. She was quite active in all of that. She never sat around, like I said before, at one time she managed Burger King. One time she drove a UPS truck. One time I've seen her on a tractor digging swimming pools, And I didn't want to do that myself. So. Anyway, then that was the first chapter in her life. The second chapter started when she started volunteering for the city of Grapevine. And that's where it all got started, I guess you might say. She was volunteer for several years. PW, how many do you remember? Several.
About 5 years.
About 5 years. Well, she wouldn't go home, so PW finally hired her. But it turned into a job. Eventually, I think her title was director over special events. I believe I'm right. But anyway, she loved her job. She loved the people she worked with. She loved all the guys from the service center that helped her out with all the events and all that. But y'all remember the old guy on TV, the cable guy? Well, he coined the phrase, "get her done." The hell, I think Gayle wrote it for him. Well, she knew how to get it done. She didn't. She wasn't a bit bashful about it, and didn't really care whose toes she stepped on, but she did get it done. So, many thanks to the city of Grapevine. It's been a rough year. It's been a rough year for a lot of us. I will look back and say that I looked over my shoulder several times and she was there. Thank you.
Just an aside, and it just reminded me, his dad had a little store over there south of where Charlie's is now, and my dad drove a gasoline truck. Now, I told you, we didn't have a TV. And so my dad, I would go with him sometimes. Anyway, but that was one of our last stops at your dad's service station, or his store.
Started in 1938.
Yes. And we went in there, and there was a TV. The little black and musk, it was musk, or I don't know, some off-brand.
Crosby.
Oh, I don't know. But I taught my dad into buying that TV from your dad, and I was so, we had a TV at home, in black and white, but anyway, because of your dad.
Where I knew the Halls were growing up, because going out to catfish hunt was, a big deal. But but I was gone so long. So I've been back 9 years now, so I hadn't been back too long, and we had a big funeral at the funeral home. Supposed to have one about 11 o'clock one morning. I come pulling out here, and the parking lot is full. Jammed, there's not a damn space, and I panicked. I thought, hell, what's the family gonna, who's here? Who's in this parking lot? Well, they were having this, I don't know if it was something to do with spring into Nash Farm or that butterfly garden that the something was going on there. And I had been here just long enough, I thought, everybody had told me Gayle's kind of the unofficial mayor of Grapevine. So I called her, had her number, and I said, like a big dummy, I'm standing there at the funeral, and I said, Gayle, what the hell are we gonna do? I've got a funeral that's coming here, and I don't know what the hell to do. And it wasn't 5 minutes, I'm out in the parking lot. I hear on this megaphone coming from down here, everybody parked at Lucas Funeral Home, you have to move, there's gonna be a funeral. I was pissed off half the town, and here comes the people flooding to the botanical garden going, we're so sorry, we're sorry. I was saying, I'm sorry. And everybody, so I knew then, call Gayle if you need to get her done. Uh-oh, here we go.
Peter and I worked at the camp store in the RV park, in the little camp store thing there. The 3 of the city boys came in one day, and I didn't know them. And I was sitting there talking to them, and I said, I just want y'all to know my sister-in-law is Gayle Hall. This one guy said, yeah, I got her number right here. See, it says God.
So next up, Dennis Luers is going to come and share about his father, and not to steal your thunder, but one of the things that I'm thrilled and honored about when I came back here was to even get to meet him. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and there's not too many World War II veterans left at all now, but to have met somebody that fought in the Battle of the Bulge was amazing. And I'll leave it at that. I could go on and on. Dennis, as you stand in your father's shadow, come and share with us.
Thank you, Mark. Mark obviously was very instrumental with helping with plans for Dad, and I'm honored here to speak about my dad, Harold Luers. Dad passed January 22, 2020, just before COVID. So we're blessed that way too, that he didn't have to deal with it. We dealt with it later. This last summer, we did a memorial service for him up in Iowa, where he was born. He was 95 and a half years old, so am I blessed to have a father that long. He was raised in Washington, Iowa on the family farm. The family farm is from 1842. My youngest cousin is still on the farm and is still working farm. As Mark said, Dad served in Patton's Third Army, and he was there at the Battle of Bulge, but he never liked to talk about it. So here's a good story. Here at the Historical Society, Duff and Tommy had coordinated a meeting and program for veterans. And they'd asked Dad to come and speak. Dad said, no, I don't want to talk about it. But he came to the meeting, he sat right over here. The program was almost over, and Duff said, Mr. Luers, anything you'd like to say? And he, previous to this point, never really talked about it. He stood up, and he started talking. And he started with his boot camp, and he didn't quit talking until the Russians came to Czechoslovakia, and the war was almost over. And that's some of the first times I ever heard these stories. But he was in the grocery business. They owned a little store called H&M Grocery, Harold and May. He also, when the war ended, they asked him to sign up for the reserves, and he said, well, I don't know about that, but he signed. Then came Korea. So he was called back, went to Korea. In the States, he spent the time there. And over the years, he continued in the grocery business. He was, we moved, you've heard of Army brats? Well, we were grocery brats. Every 2 or 3 years, we moved. Every 2 or 3 years, he got a promotion. And ultimately, after multiple promotions, he was the district manager for Eva grocery stores. He had 16 stores in 2 states, Iowa and Illinois. He was very fortunate to retire in his mid-50s. He and Mom traveled, enjoyed hunting morel mushrooms. I don't know if you know about morel mushrooms, but one of his favorite things. He worked with the Bluebird Society, maintaining bluebird houses, gardening, volunteering. They came to Grapevine in 2009. Mom was ill, but they wanted to be closer to grandkids and family. They loved Texas. They spent the winters here. They were RV people. They'd come out to the RV park. That was Corps of Engineers Park at the time. And they'd stay for 7 days, and they had to go away somewhere to come back. And then, of course, with New Campground, they loved the Vineyard Campground also. They were members of the Methodist Church, very, very avid Christians. Mom passed in 2013 here. Sometime thereafter, he met Maybelle Woods. They started dating. So here they are, octogenarians dating. One of the first date was the Historical Society Museum opened, and they had a big dedication at the CBB building. He was interested in Grapevine history. Of course, Maybelle gave him a lot of that history himself. And Dad stayed very informed what was going on in the city. Oftentimes he would tell me about a new business or a new restaurant opening that I didn't even know about. So he loved Grapevine. He was an ambassador of the city. He loved the Historical Society. He loved coming here for meetings. And I was very blessed to be his son. Thank you.
We have 2 more people that we're going to discuss tonight. Before we do, Dennis, do you know if your dad ever got to meet Maggie Magellas or not? Did he know that he was living here in Colleyville, or did they?
I don't believe so.
They probably weren't even aware. The only reason I know of him is because one day the manager at the Grapevine funeral home called me, because I've let everybody know if a old World War II veteran dies, I don't want to know about it. And she said, we have a gentleman that we just got a call, and his son's saying he was the most decorated officer in the history of the 82nd Airborne, named Maggie Magellan. And I said, well, you know, I said, no shit, you're kidding me. I mean, what I said, I about fell out of the chair. So I mentioned him because he also fought the Battle of the Bulge, and he happened to live here in Colleyville because he had a son here. And it was also during the pandemic, right along with Gary Blagg. We had all the Joint Chiefs came to this man's 101st birthday. He was 103 when he died, and we had his funeral. And he had more hair than any woman in this room tonight. Gray, gorgeous, big, thick locks of hair, but I share that because there were only 10, well, we snuck in an 11th family member, wasn't supposed to tell. 11 people, and me and the manager, and that was it for this gentleman that at the Battle of the Bulge, which for those of you that don't know, was the last great winter offensive that Hitler pulled, and it damn near succeeded. And in that battle, a big Panzer tank was turning to kill him and all 200 men, and he ran up, just this regular old boy from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and disabled it, blew the tread off, and jumped up, threw a grenade in, killed all of them, saved all of his men. And then he ended up, they liberated a concentration camp named Berlin. They didn't even know about it. They just stumbled on it, had no idea what they had even done until, you know, it had taken place. So I just mentioned that as a link up with Harold. And, you know, we never know, like John Boyd, the Grapevine immigrant, and all, we never know, you know, who's going to come into our life, or all of these connections, you know, that are out there, that energy. So I won't ask you to all hold hands in a minute. Get emotional. I just wanted to say that. Duff is going to get up and tell us about Mike Morris. And I'm interested in this because I don't know anything about him, and I want to know.
Well, he was a great guy. How many of you like?
Can you use my?
You're going to have to get up here.
Nobody's ever used it, not me.
Well, here you go.
Mike Morris is one of our members. He served on the board with me, I think my first term as president, and he handled publications for us and did PR and just got involved. But he and his wife Kathleen had a telecommunications company, and he worked at one time for the government, he worked for the state of Texas, he worked for the military. I mean, he had quite the resume in terms of his skills and expertise in telecommunications. And he was wonderful at the museum. I mean, he was so passionate about the Victorian cabinet, and he wanted to make sure it was fireproof. And he knocked on every door. I think he went to the cemetery and knocked on tombstones. He talked to everybody about trying to get that done, which we finally, you know, of course did. But he just was passionate about that. And things in the museum, we have some very expensive equipment in the cases that are state of the art. And of course, you know, you can, once they're out of warranty, which they are now, you can call, but he could fix it. He was brilliant about doing things like that. And he really cared about the Historical Society, he and his wife both, and she got ill, and then after a while he had to take care of her, and he wasn't as active in the society, but he really had a passion for it and gave a lot of time, loved working at the museum, loved volunteering for festivals. I mean, if it needed to be done, he jumped in there and did it. And he's one of those unsung heroes that you probably wouldn't have even known or, you know, ever noticed him around. He's very quiet. But he was just a super great guy. And like John, I mean, to me, John had a great personality, but he'd be kind of quiet. You know, I mean, you get him off and get him started, he had a great personality. It was a lot of fun, but he could be, you know, if you didn't know that, you think he was, you know, kind of quiet. And so was Mike. Of course, there were a lot of women on the board, and we kind of outnumbered them, so that made it part of it. But anyway, but he was a super great guy. Does anybody else have any stories about Mike? I know he worked with a lot of you. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I know he, one of the big telecommunications jobs he did was over 30 years. He managed all the telecommunications for that big football game you guys like that happens during the state fair.
Oh, that's
That's how you.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't like football. He did all the telecommunications for that for years, and he would never be allowed by Kathleen to go out of town. She wouldn't be allowed to leave because that was his passion.
He loved the fire department. He did a lot of volunteer work. He was in the Alumni Association for the fire department, and he did a lot of communications work for them. And you know, nobody ever knew those things. He just was one of those quiet, behind-the-scenes guys that we're so blessed to have had him in our group. And,
Except when it came to getting a fire system.
I'm sorry, I did. I said that. Yeah, the fire system at the touring cabin. Yeah. Well, it's not really a fire. Well, never mind. It's covered. It's all good. So anyway, but he was another great.
I guess Duff wanted me to say something last a few weeks ago. We sponsored a lunch at the Grapevine Chamber Women's Division, right? You got to go where the power really is. So that's where I went. And, you know, it's interesting because I had chosen that date when I was given some dates. I said May, because May's Memorial Day, and I feel like that's what we, you know, we're all about. And I wasn't thinking about Mother's Day at the time. And it was closer to Mother's Day than Memorial Day, and did some research. And really, both of those, while they're very different days that we celebrate, really have a common tie back to the Civil War. That's really when they were both begun. And Memorial Day in a very different way. I can't think of her name right now that wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. She and
Catherine Bates.
say again.
Catherine Bates.
Thank you. And then the woman's name is down in Virginia. So that all became about Memorial Day because they wanted to decorate the graves after the Battle of Gettysburg. And then it kind of went down in a separate, you know, the South wanted to do theirs at their time and the North wanted to do theirs at their time. But interesting in that other woman that, and I'm sorry I don't have her name, they had started mothering, or not mothers clubs, but clubs to decorate. And they decided that they were going to get along and also care for the wounded from both sides, North and South. So they never did battle over that. And then when I look back at, that was for Memorial Day, I look back at Mother's Day and found that that mothering clubs had started, and because these mothers got together and they did not want to lose any more of their, at that time, sons, although there were women killed in the Civil War too. And that was sort of the catalyst for Mother's Day as well. So I had no idea that the two, while they're very different, were spawned from that horrible time. You know, we've never lost as many in one single war like other countries. Russia, China, Germany lost way more than we ever have. But that war, you know, it was thought we lost about 650,000 for a long time, but most historians agree that it's edging up to 1 million now. And those weren't just the boys, there was collateral damage, as the news likes to call it, of innocent women and children too, you know, because it was the first heavy artillery war, so nasty war. So that's just a brief touch on that, if that's okay.
Oh, that was interesting.
You know, I'm going to preface, I hate to do that, but that I don't know that I'm giving this last person her due, because I don't know as much about her as I'd like to. So when I'm finished, and it will be short, if anybody wants to chime in, please do so. And this is about Merrill Stacy, the Stacy Furniture Boys' mom, and also a relative of the mayor's. And so this is, now I did text Bill today. I was at that, by the way, y'all got one of the neatest damn coffee shops in Grapevine of anywhere I've ever been. I've passed it a million times, I've never been in there on Northwest Highway. Refine.
Oh, yeah,
Refine. So I texted him from there, and he said their grandfathers were brothers, and they share a common great grandparents that walked here, according to Bill, from Tennessee, about 1884, and I was like, oh, that's after we got here, so that's okay. So Merrill was born September the 2nd, 1930 in Coppell to Hazel and Arvell Tate. Her grandfather and, as I said, the mayor's grandfather were brothers. They shared common great-grandparents. She attended Carroll schools. Now, I was told that Carol only went to the 8th grade then, and so when she got through that, and they said, you're going to have to transfer to Grapevine to go to high school, nope, not going to do that. So that was the end of that. She was not going to go over to Grapevine on those rough roads and go to school.
She went to Carroll Hill.
Oh,
It was Carol.
Carroll Hill.
Carroll Hill.
Yeah.
Very good. So, after she married Roy Stacy on April the 26th, 1946, and she passed on June the 22nd, 2021. She was, well, I'll read this that I have from, that Tommy gave me, and then I'll tell you what really came to mind for me about her. Then I don't know if this was in the characters book, but these are just reflections, once upon a lifetime, recollections of my childhood. Growing up in the country when I was a little girl was a very different life than it would be for children today. We lived north of Grapevine, about 10 miles. The gravel roads were not always maintained well, so the bumpy ride made it seem that it was much further than it really was. On the way to our house, we had to cross Denton Creek. The old boards rumbled as you drove across the bridge. This creek was well known for two things. One was for having huge catfish, and the other because it flooded the entire bottomland during the rainy season. Years later, it would become the bed of Grapevine Lake. And I didn't realize that, and I've got pictures of my great-grandfather and the Yanks and the Yanceys coming back from fishing at Denton Creek. They were all holding a big, long boat stick with fish hanging from them. So there must have been a heck of a lot of fish in Denton Creek. And I've heard it referred to many times. So when I read her obituary and everything I read about her was what a great mother and grandmother and great-grandmother she was, and that a lot of friends of theirs called her grandmother. So that to me is one of the most, I always thought Mother's Day ought to be a national holiday myself. And so that resonates with me anytime that anyone is thought of like that. So I thought, if she was affectionately called grandmother by many of the friends, and the most loving and devoted wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, sister, friend, I thought I just should look up some quotes that sort of flesh that out. And these are it. An old Spanish proverb, an ounce of mother is worth a pound of clergy. I like that. No offense, I don't see any of the reverends here. This is from Our Mothers, compiled by Mary Ellet Ayar in 1916. The formative period for building character for eternity is in the nursery. The mother is queen of that realm and sways a scepter more potent than that of kings and priests. Very true. And lastly, a Jewish proverb. God could not be everywhere, so he created mothers. I know you all have heard that before. So without knowing Merrill, and I only really know one Stacy brother, the nice one that comes to Kathy Livingood's soiree. So I'm going to leave it to Junior Hall and the rest of them.
South Lake, but she was a member of the Grapevine Historical Society.
Oh, wow, yeah, I figured so. Junior, go
Well,
ahead.
Sue, and correct me if I'm wrong, Fire Chief Darrell Brown, his mother, Charlotte,
It's her
Merle's
sister. Yes.
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
yes.
Well, there you go.
yes.
Yeah.
This whole town is kin in some
It is.
I'm pretty darn close.
And then Arnold Tate married Elaine Estill.
Yes.
That's a brother of
Oh,
ours.
Estels, yeah, okay. I remember.
Yeah, and, go further, it kept me out here. As far as I can go with it right now.
Yeah, she and RJ got married. They were very young.
Yeah.
And, huh?
15 and 17.
Okay, I knew.
15,
He retired.
15 and 17,
He
yeah.
retired from General Motors. He had a heck of a job over there. Her husband, RJ, did. He died several years ago. He had a stroke. But then he lived several years after that, didn't he?
Yeah.
I got some women down there can help me out.
They love to tell the story when they lived in Bel Air. And they had the 3 boys, Randy and Ronnie. Then they had, Rhonda was the youngest and the only girl. And they lived in, Ronnie and Rick both say she made the bed, they just had a regular sized bed. So they put the 3 boys this way.
Yeah.
And then the princess had the other bedroom. Rhonda was the princess. Yeah, she was.
She was interesting.
And they love country and western music. They go down to Rocky River and Johnny High.
Yeah, they were
Yeah,
Johnny
had
Highs
seats
all
right in
the
front of
time.
us.
And she kept up with everything. Even as old, she was on Facebook and she always knew, and she was very, very interested in politics.
Yeah.
She was a Republican. And she wanted everybody to know that she
Everybody knew that.
I ran into her in Sam's one day it was kind of at the end of COVID. We were still wearing masks, but people were getting out. And sometimes you didn't recognize the person behind the mask. But anyway, she said, well, hey, Duff. And I looked over there and I said, Miss Merle, how are you? What are you doing out shopping? She said, well, I just got tired of staying home. I had to get out. And I said, well, that's kind of me too. And she said, you've cut your hair. And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, I hated it when you let it grow out. She said, it looked horrible. And I said, well, that's what most of my friends told me. And I said, but I just needed to be here. She said, don't ever do that again. If you do, we're going to get together, what did she call it? When you get together and try to say.
Intervention?
An intervention, yeah. She said, we're going to have an intervention. Don't ever let your hair grow out. And I told Rhonda that at the funeral. And she said, Mother told me that, and she said, I was mortified. And I said, I thought it was funny, not everybody would be honest with you. And she said, Mother, I can't believe you did that. Well, that's what she thought, so there you go.
She stopped me one day, and I think it was in Walmart, because I was on Facebook too, and she was on there 24 hours a day. And she stopped me in Walmart one day and said, Junior, how much do you want to hear about on Facebook? And I said, well, not really very much. I said, I like to hear what your family's doing, but I don't want to hear all that other crap. But she stopped me in the middle of Walmart, wanting to know how much I wanted to know about you on Facebook.
She may have gone only to the 8th grade, but Merle always was at the rec center taking classes.
Yes.
Every time I would go in there after I retired to be there, there's Merle again. She's going to take another class. She never stopped learning. And she was for education 100%.
Yes, she was.
But we were very dear friends, prayer buddies, She just called me and say, we need to do this. And I just respected her so much, but she sure didn't quit at 8th grade.
See, all of Carroll Hill at the 8th grade and all Pleasant Run had to come to Grapevine in our classes, they didn't have a high school back then.
Well, we have certainly had some of Grapevine's most, unforgettable and amazing characters talked about here tonight. Does anybody else, I know everybody knew somebody because that's why you're here. Does anybody else have anything you want to add?
Well, Merle learned the computer like you wouldn't believe from Pam Price, but she took the, she was always.
Merrill Stacy learned how to do things with a computer from.
At the rec.
Oh, at the rec center.
From Pam Price.
And for whatever it's worth, I've got a little bit of Gary Blagg in me. Because I was watching the funeral at home, being streamed, and I thought, there's nobody in the parking lot. There's nobody in the parking lot to greet them when they come up. And I drove up there and I waited till the end of the service to see y'all coming out.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
So I'm a rebel like him.
Well, y'all, thanks for letting me be a part of this. I don't know that I'm really worthy, but I tried to, and especially from Junior and Wanda and Carolyn and Dennis and those of you that talked about lost your own, and for Maggie that was here. Grapevine's an interesting place. There are other towns in America that probably are similar, but in this region up here, I will say, there is still some of that old school network here that's, been lost in a lot of places. I don't know why exactly that it carries